London, 1975. Two women, two brutal murders, one on each side of the city. A Playboy bunny and a schoolgirl. No apparent connection. For decades, their killer walked free. The cases went cold. Until modern science revealed a chilling truth. They were killed by the same man. A killer still at large. A mystery that has spanned generations. This is a story of glamour and tragedy, of lives cut short and of justice long delayed. Join us as we unravel one of Britain's most baffling cold cases. Our story begins with Eve Stratford, a young woman whose life was as colorful as it was brief. Born Elizabeth Eve Stratford on December 28, 1953 in Dortmund, West Germany, Eve was the daughter of an English medic serving in the Royal Army Medical Corps and his German wife. Her childhood was marked by frequent moves, a reflection of her father's military postings. Despite this nomadic lifestyle, or perhaps because of it, Eve developed a vibrant personality and a striking beauty that would later define her public image. By 1972, at the age of 19, Eve had settled in London. She moved into a flat in Leighton, East London with her boyfriend, Tony Priest, the lead singer of a band called Onyx. It was here, in the bustling heart of 1970s London, that Eve's life would take a glamorous turn. In 1973, Eve began working as a bunny at the prestigious Playboy Club in Park Lane. Known for her blonde hair and striking looks, she quickly became a popular figure in London's nightlife scene. She rubbed shoulders with celebrities, socialized with famous figures like Sid James and Eric Morecambe, and lived what many would consider a dream life. But it was in March 1975 that Eve would gain her most significant public exposure. And tragically, it may have been this very exposure that sealed her fate. Eve appeared as the centerfold and Girl of the Month in Mayfair magazine, a popular men's publication. The issue hit newsstands just days before her murder, with Eve's image on the top shelf of every newsagent in March that year. On March 18, 1975, Eve went about what seemed like a normal day. She visited her agent in Camden and then went to a promotions consultancy in Bayswater. At 3:30 p.m., she began her journey home. A neighbor last saw her walking towards her flat, wearing a floppy hat and carrying dried flowers. What happened next remains a subject of speculation and horror. At 4:30 p.m., the women living in the flat below Eve's heard a male and female voice talking calmly, followed by a thud and the sound of footsteps. Less than an hour later, at 5:20 p.m., Eve's boyfriend returned home to a scene of unimaginable horror. Eve Stratford had been brutally murdered. Her throat had been cut between 8 and 12 times, her face and neck mutilated. She was found partially unclothed with a nylon stocking tied around one ankle and her hands bound with a scarf. The scene was so gruesome that even seasoned detectives were shaken. The investigation that followed was intense but frustratingly inconclusive. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Eve might have known her killer. A peculiar cloying scent lingered in the room, a tantalizing clue that ultimately led nowhere. In the days leading up to her murder, Eve had received several mysterious phone calls. The caller would either hang up without speaking or whisper obscenities. On the very day of her murder, she received 3 such calls. Was this the killer stalking his prey? As the investigation progressed, more questions arose. Had the Mayfair magazine spread attracted the wrong kind of attention? Was the killer someone from Eve's glamorous nightlife circle? Or was it a stranger drawn in by her public image? Despite exhaustive efforts, including the release of 2 photo-fit pictures of men seen near the crime scene, the trail went cold. By 1976, all leads had been exhausted, and the case was wound down, leaving Eve's family and friends without answers or justice. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a much larger, more chilling story. 6 months after Eve Stratford's murder, on the other side of London, another young life would be cut tragically short. Lynne Weedon was a typical 16-year-old schoolgirl. Born on November 11, 1958, she lived with her family in Hounslow, West London. Unlike Eve Stratford, Lynne wasn't in the public eye. She was simply a teenager looking forward to her future. with no idea that her path would intersect with the killer's. On September 3, 1975, Lynne had reason to celebrate. She had just received her O-level results and decided to mark the occasion by going out with friends to the Elm Tree pub on New Heston Road. It was a night of celebration that would end in tragedy. At 11 p.m., Lynne began her journey home. She parted ways with her friends on the Great West Road and continued alone. In a fateful decision, she chose to take a shortcut through an alleyway known as Short Hedges, now called School Walk. Lynne had previously vowed never to use this alleyway after dark, knowing it was frequented by prowlers. But on this night, perhaps buoyed by her exam success and the warmth of friendship, she decided to risk it. It was a decision that would cost Lynne her life. At approximately 11:20 p.m., as Lynne walked through the alleyway, she was struck over the head with a heavy object, possibly a piece of lead pipe. The blow fractured her skull, but the attacker wasn't finished. In a display of chilling strength and determination, the killer lifted Lynne's unconscious body over a set of gates and into the grounds of a nearby power substation. There, hidden from view, Lynne was raped. Her battered body wasn't discovered until the next morning, when the caretaker of a neighboring school found her. Despite her horrific injuries, Lynne was still alive when she was found. She was rushed to the hospital, but tragically she never regained consciousness and died a week later. The investigation into Lynne's murder was immediately launched. Witnesses reported seeing a white male in the alleyway around the time of the attack, and another man was seen running across the Great West Road into the alleyway. Could this have been Lynne's attacker fleeing the scene? Unlike Eve Stratford's case, there was no obvious motive for Lynne's murder. She wasn't a public figure. She hadn't been in the media spotlight. She was, to all appearances, a random victim, a fact that made the crime all the more terrifying for the local community. The police faced significant challenges in their investigation. The crime scene, an outdoor location, didn't yield as many clues as they hoped. The weapon used to strike Lynne was never found, and while there were witness sightings, they didn't lead to any concrete suspects. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the trail grew cold. Like Eve Stratford's case, Lynne Weedon's murder remained unsolved, another tragic mystery in a year that had already seen too much violence. At the time, no one suspected that these two crimes, separated by 6 months and occurring on opposite sides of London, could be connected. It would take nearly 3 decades and significant advancements in forensic science before the shocking truth would come to light. For years, the murders of Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon remained cold cases, filed away but never forgotten. Then, in 2004, nearly 3 decades after the crimes, there was a breakthrough. The Metropolitan Police decided to reopen Lynne Weedon's case. Cold case investigations had become increasingly common, thanks in large part to advancements in forensic technology. DNA analysis, a tool that didn't exist in 1975, now offered new hope for solving old crimes. What happened next stunned investigators and the public alike. In 2007, DNA evidence revealed a chilling truth. The murders of Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon had been committed by the same person. 2 crimes that had seemed unconnected, separated by time, distance, and the apparent randomness of the victims, were suddenly linked. This revelation breathed new life into both investigations. Eve Stratford's case, which had been closed since 1976, was immediately reopened. Detectives now had a new perspective on both crimes. They weren't looking at 2 separate killers, but one individual capable of horrific violence against women. The investigation took on a new urgency. 16 of the main suspects from the original investigations had their DNA taken, but none matched the killer's sample. The police turned to the public for help, featuring both cases on the BBC's Crime Watch program in September 2007. On the program, DCI Andy Mortimer stated unequivocally that both murders were sexually motivated. He pointed out a chilling detail. In both cases, the attacker had brought a weapon to the scene and then taken it away, indicating that these were premeditated attacks. The police also revealed their belief that it was unlikely these were the killer's only crimes. Given the level of violence and the apparent ease with which the perpetrator had evaded capture, investigators suspected he may have committed other offenses both before and after these attacks. In 2015, on the 40th anniversary of Eve Stratford's murder, police issued a fresh appeal for information. They offered a substantial reward of £40,000 for information leading to the capture of the killer. Detectives noted that the perpetrator would likely have been a white male between 17 and 30 years old at the time of the murders, making him between 63 and 77 years old today. The investigation continues to this day. Police have suggested that individuals such as psychiatrists, probation officers, cellmates, or prison guards might hold crucial information. The killer, they reason, may have made admissions or disclosures over the years. As one detective told The Guardian, "It's inconceivable the killer of Eve and Lynne has kept the perfect secret for 40 years." Despite these efforts, the case remains unsolved. The families of Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon still wait for justice, nearly half a century after their loved ones were taken from them. The revelation that Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon's murders were committed by the same individual raised a chilling possibility. Could there be other victims? One case that has drawn particular attention is the murder of Elizabeth Perevincina. On September 9, 1977, almost exactly 2 years after Lynne Weedon's murder, 27-year-old Perevincina was killed just a mile away from where Weedon had been attacked. The similarities were striking. Like Weedon, Perevincina had been walking home late at night along the Great West Road. She was attacked from behind with a blunt instrument, her skull fractured. While there was no evidence of sexual assault in Perevincina's case, detectives believed the attacker might have been disturbed before he could interfere with her body. Another case that has been speculatively linked is the murder of Patsy Morris. In June 1980, 14-year-old Morris went missing in Hounslow, less than 3 miles from where Weedon had been killed. Her body was found 2 days later on Hounslow Heath, partially clothed and face down in undergrowth. While Morris's murder occurred 5 years after Weedon's, the proximity and the apparent sexual motivation have led some to wonder if there could be a connection. It's important to note, however, that not all suspected links have proven true. For instance, there was speculation about a connection between Eve Stratford's murder and that of Linda Farrow, another woman who had her throat cut in her own home in 1979. However, DNA evidence later proved that these cases were not linked. These potentially related cases underscore the complexity of the investigation and the possibility that the killer responsible for Eve and Lynne's deaths may have claimed more victims. The murders of Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon remain one of the most haunting unsolved cases in British criminal history. 2 young women with their whole lives ahead of them, brutally taken by a killer who has evaded justice for nearly half a century. Their stories serve as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime, not just on the victims, but on their families, friends, and communities. The pain and uncertainty have lingered for decades, a wound that cannot fully heal without closure, yet there is still hope. Advances in forensic science have already linked these 2 cases, proving that new technologies can shed light on even the coldest of cases. Every day, investigators continue to work on solving this mystery, driven by the belief that it's never too late for justice. To you, our viewers, we make this appeal. If you have any information, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please come forward. Your tip could be the missing piece that finally brings closure to this case and peace to the families of Eve and Lynne. Remember, there is no statute of limitations on murder. It's never too late to do the right thing. If you have information, please contact the Metropolitan Police or Crime Stoppers. You can remain anonymous. As we conclude, let us remember Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon not as victims, but as young women full of life and potential. Their stories deserve to be told, and their killer deserves to face justice. Until then, the search for truth continues.